Marianne Krediet praat met Carol Bowman.
Hello, Carol. Welcome to Holland and to our program. Could you tell us a little bit about how you became interested in this research on past lives with children?
It all began when my son Chase was 5 years old, and he developed an hysterical fear of loud booming sounds, which we first noticed at a 4th of July Independence Day celebration. When the fireworks began, he became absolutely hysterically afraid of the sounds. And at the time, I had no idea why he had such a strong reaction. And as these things sometimes happen with young children, I thought he was just exhausted or had had too much excitement that day, and I forgot about it. But a few weeks later, it happened again when he was exposed to loud booming sounds. He again became hysterical. And fortunately, within a few weeks, a hypnotherapist friend was visiting us, and I happened to mention Chase's phobia to him, and he asked if we would like some help with it, and I said, of course. And he said, let's try a little experiment. And at that time, I thought he might give Chase a hypnotic suggestion to get over his fear. But what he actually did was say, sit on your mother's lap, close your eyes, and tell me what you see when you hear the loud sounds that frighten you. And immediately, Chase, this little guy sitting on my lap, described himself as an adult male soldier in the midst of a battle.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Jumped into the past life.
Right.
Yeah.
Immediately. And I was really surprised because Chase was not the type of child who was interested in war or war toys. He did not even own a toy gun at the time. And he went on to describe himself in a battle, and he was describing emotions that were appropriate to an adult in that situation. It was not a glorified picture of war. He was scared, he was confused.
And he had not been exposed to a lot of war movies and stuff.
Nothing. We had a very strict policy of television. He watched Sesame Street. I think they have that in the Netherlands too. We didn't have any books around the house about war, and none of the Disney movies he had seen had anything like this in them. So I knew in an instant that this was something outside of his experience. And the way he described it, too, was not the way it would be depicted in a movie. He said he was scared. He did not want to be there shooting other people. And he described how he was crouching behind a rock, and he had a rifle with a long sword at the end. And he said suddenly he was shot in his right wrist. And he said they took him to a hospital, but as he described it, it was just like a tent, poles in the ground with some material covering it. And he said they put him on a bed, but it was not like a regular bed. It was more like a hard bench. So what he was describing was a field hospital, which was something he absolutely could not know about at age 5. And he went on to say that they bandaged his wrist, and they ordered him back into battle, and he said he was very upset about this. And at this point, my hypnotherapist friend, who had experience doing past life regression, realized that Chase was very uncomfortable in his role as a soldier. And he did a little intervention at this point. He said to Chase in very simple language, he said, we live many different lifetimes on Earth. We play different roles as actors in a play, and in some lives we are soldiers and have to kill in battle. In other lives we are killed in this role, but there's absolutely no blame in it. And I thought my son would not understand his words, but I could see that he was relaxing, and by the look on his face, his anxiety seemed to leave his face, and he was understanding this.
And you had never been exposed to these kind of experience yourself also, or?
Actually, I had.
Oh, you had.
I was familiar with past life regression, but at that moment I had never realized that a child could have a past life memory. And as a result of that, he went on to describe how he was ordered to go behind a cannon, to man a cannon. And at that point, Chase just opened his eyes and smiled and hopped off my lap, and that was that. But as a result of that 10 or 15 minute experience, Chase's phobia of loud noises went away. And also, I hadn't realized as he was talking about it, but Chase had had a chronic rash, an eczema on that spot on his wrist where he said he had been shot since he was a baby. And it was so severe that I had taken him to several doctors, and we tried different traditional therapies to heal the rash, even homeopathy. We tried everything, and the rash did not respond to medical treatment. But within a few days, the rash completely disappeared and never appeared again. So it was quite amazing. So after that, I started wondering if other children had past life memories too, or since many children, young children, have phobias, could some of these be related to past life experiences? Mm-hmm. And if so, could other parents help their children eliminate these fears in childhood or even physical problems that could have a past life origin? Mm-hmm. So at that point I started doing research, and the only information I could find was information on past life therapy with adults. And this was in 1988, and I found a few books written by American therapists and actually British therapists. So people from all over the world were discovering past life therapy and finding that a lot of problems that adults had could be traced back to past life experiences, especially traumatic past life deaths, which was, as it turned out, exactly what happened in my son's case. He had this phobia and this chronic physical problem as a result of a traumatic past life experience, which was remedied very easily.
So, did you have a lot of trouble finding supporting research for your own experience with your children?
Yes, I found a lot of information about past life therapy with adults, and I couldn't find anything about the type of experience that my son had from therapists who had worked with children until I discovered the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson in the United States, who was the chairman of the Department of Psychiatry at a very well-respected university, the University of Virginia, who in 1961 began documenting cases of spontaneous past life recall in children. He traveled all around the world gathering literally thousands of cases of children who, without any prompting from anyone, without hypnosis, would talk about their past life experiences.
Could you talk a little bit about what is that spontaneous past life performance? How does that come about?
Well, it seems to be a natural phenomenon in young children that up until about the age of 5, children have an awareness of their past lives, and they will just talk about them while they're riding in the car or playing on the floor. Mm-hmm. They'll just come out spontaneously and they'll say, "Do you remember when I was big before?" Or, "Do you remember when I was big before and I was a sailor on a boat and I fell off and died?" And these cases, these memories occur in children all over the world, in every culture.
And we never pay attention to these kind of things, really.
Exactly. Oh. And he has 2,600 cases from all over the world that are meticulously documented. He researched cases in which the child would give enough specific information about who they were in the previous life so he could actually investigate the case and find that the child talked about a specific person who actually lived and died before this child was born. And he found that if a child made statements about the life that they remembered, 90% of these statements were correct. And the child would have even physical characteristics that corresponded to what he called the previous personality. The child would have behaviors that were similar to the previous personality. And to me, this is revolutionary information. What he has done as a scientist is that he has empirically proved that these past life memories are memories of actual previous existences of some specific person. So he has an abundance of research in his files at the University of Virginia, and he's written volumes on the subject, but he never addressed the question of healing, which I was interested in because of my own experience.
Yeah.
he said that a lot of these children would have phobias relating to the way they died. For example, if a child said that they drowned in a past life, in 1/3 of the cases they would have a phobia of water. They would be afraid to be bathed or afraid to go into a swimming pool. So that supported what I found with my own child. And he found that these children would know things about the previous life that they could not possibly have learned in any normal fashion. So he has all of this scientific documentation that these memories are real. So I looked at his research and what I was finding from the past life therapists, and I began to see that this is a natural phenomenon in young children, and perhaps it's a natural opportunity for children to heal issues which they bring with them into the present life from previous lives. And since I began thinking in these terms, I have gotten many cases from American parents and now through the internet, through parents all over the world who have these experiences with their children. Mm-hmm. Since my book came out in the States in April of last year, I've gotten literally hundreds of cases of children who spontaneously, without any prompting, without hypnosis, talk about their previous lives. And parents in the West have no idea that this is even possible, let alone what to do with it.
Right. Because I can imagine a lot of parents will react like, well, this is fantasy, or some other thing they might have picked up from television, whatever. So how is it that you can distinguish a past life memory from a fantasy? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yes, from talking to hundreds of parents, I started hearing the same things over and over again.
Like what things?
Like, which I distilled into these 4 signs, how you can tell memory from fantasy. And I also want to say that perhaps some of these things that children are saying are fantasy, that they picked up from television or a movie or their older brother or sister. So you have to take that into account too. But when a child is expressing a past life memory, they're very matter-of-fact and direct. And you have to remember that most of these memories occur before the age of 5. So we're talking about very young children, even 2- and 3-year-olds, mostly 2- and 3-year-olds.
Why before the age of 5 especially? Is that a specific moment or something?
I think there's a part of us at that age that is still, the consciousness is still fluid with the past. We haven't learned that it's impossible yet to remember a past life through our cultural conditioning. We haven't had the life experience to layer over these memories. So before the age of 5, these memories are still available to us as other spiritual experiences in childhood. You've heard of children perhaps seeing angels or deceased relatives. It's the same type of thing. The consciousness is just more open at this age. And when children speak of these past life memories at this very early age, they're very matter-of-fact and direct and very serious when they're talking about it. And it's the seriousness and the directness of what they're saying that gets your attention. And in almost all cases, parents say that they get a feeling in their bodies, they get goosebumps. When children speak of these things, there's some recognition in the truth of what they're saying, and they feel it physically. We've all had the experience when we've heard someone say something that is truthful or something true about spirit, that we get that feeling in our bodies, we get tingly. And this occurs too when children speak of past lives. And they're also very consistent in what they say. That's another indication too. When a young child talks about a fantasy, you can tell by the tone of voice, they kind of da-da-da-da-da, they talk about it kind of in a sing-songy way, and they'll add pieces that they might have seen from a Disney story, and it's not very realistic. But with the past life memories, it's a very realistic story that they tell, and they will tell the same story over days, weeks, months, and even over a couple of years. And they will also elaborate on the core of the story, but maintain the same story, adding more details as they acquire more ability in language. So that's another way to tell. Mm-hmm. And thirdly, probably the most obvious thing is they'll talk about things that you know that they haven't learned in their 2 or 3 short years on Earth. They can give you very specific information, as my son did, about, as we learned later after he talked about this over a period of 3 years, that he was describing himself as a Civil War soldier. And he accurately described what a Civil War field hospital looked like, what a cannon, what the equipment, the artillery looked like during the Civil War, and gave a lot of details that were later verified by an historian. So that's the most obvious thing. If a child talks to you about things that you know they haven't learned, then be alert for a possibility of past life memory. Mm-hmm. And if also they have the matter-of-fact tone and there's a consistency in what they're saying. Usually these signs are all together, not just one sign, but you can tell through all four. And the fourth sign is that there's usually a corresponding behavior or trait related to the story they're telling. For example, if a child said that they were a sailor in a past life and they fell off their boat and died, and they're deathly afraid of water, it's a pretty good indication that they're talking about a real past life memory. Or it may happen that a child will have an unusual ability. For example, I have a case of a 4-year-old in California who went on a field trip with his nursery school, and they went to a small airport, and one of the pilots of a small airplane let the children get on the plane and get into the cockpit. And this one child got in, sat down in the pilot's seat, and told the pilot exactly how to fly the plane. And he said if there had been a key in the ignition, this child would have flown the plane.
Yeah.
So he was a little amazed, and the mother couldn't explain it. But she went to the library and got the child a book on airplanes, and he became particularly fixated on Japanese Zeros from the Second World War. So she picked up on his interest and asked him, did you ever fly one of these? And he said, oh yes, of course. And he elaborated on the story, and she said, well, if you were in the Second World War, did you die? And he said, yes, I died when I crashed my plane into a ship, which was typical of the kamikaze pilots in World War II. Yeah. So just with that little prompting, she got the past life story from him, from his unusual ability. So if you see some unusual behavior in a child, an unlearned ability, for example, that could be an indication of a past life experience too.
So if this phenomenon happens spontaneously, as a parent, how is the best way to react to such a thing that your child suddenly comes out with all kinds of stories that you don't know anything about? Should you be enthusiastic? Should you just let it go? What is the best way?
The best response always is to be calm, listen with an open mind, and try to understand what they're talking about. If they're remembering a pleasant memory, there's really nothing you need to do except listen and acknowledge, oh yes, you were this in a past life, or yes, you were a ballet dancer before, that's very nice. And just let them talk about it, because it's a part of their experience and it's real. If you sense that there's something troubling that they're remembering for a past life, also encourage them with open questions. Oh, well, what happened? How did you feel about that? And help them process it. Sometimes that's all that's necessary. And sometimes if they just have the opportunity to talk about it to someone who believes them, it can have a very healing effect on them. And there's really nothing that needs to be done. They can, by doing that, they can leave that experience behind in the past where it belongs, and they can become more grounded and more present, and can move on with their lives. But it's usually the traumas that are troubling the children that need to be discussed, and it's actually more harmful to a child to shut them up or dismiss what they're saying, because then this material becomes repressed, and it could come up later in different ways for the child.
Do you think a parent should get professional help when something traumatic comes up and it's really scary for the parents?
I think that any spontaneous memory that comes up before the age of 4, for example, can be handled by a parent. And I give enough information in my book through cases and through specific information that most things can be handled by an adult with their own child. I'd say in exceptional cases where a child might talk about a past life experience later on, maybe 7, 8, or 9, and they seem to be extremely troubled by a memory, or they have an unexplained fear or a physical problem that you know is not caused by anything in this life, then it would be appropriate to consult a therapist. And there are many past life therapists in the Netherlands who are exceptionally good, who are actually far ahead of the therapists in the United States who do past life therapy with children.
So I understand you have met a lot of colleagues here in Holland and working in this particular field. And have you noticed any difference between the way you see people handling the situation in the United States than they are handling it in Holland?
I think the training programs in Holland are terrific.
Yeah?
Yeah, we're going to cut. Okay, I knew.
Ja, oké. Zeg jij me even stoppen? Do you think it's harmful for a child to recall past life with their parents or with a therapist?
Well, what I found is it's natural for a child to recall a past life memory with their parent. That's because it comes up spontaneously, and the parent is usually the one who is there when a child talks about it. So it is a natural process, and it's not harmful at all. Sometimes they just need to express what they're remembering, what they're feeling. So I believe that remembering a past life is as natural to a child as perhaps cutting teeth. It's something that happens in young children, and it's often unrecognized because in the West we have no training in this. It's not a part of our belief system, but it's something that happens all the time, and I'm finding that the cases are everywhere. Once you start talking to people, every other person has a story. They remember when they were younger, that they had the experience and didn't know what it was, but they never forgot it. Or their child made some remark or had some unusual play activity or said something once that stayed with them because it was so unusual, and that could be from a past life experience.
Yeah, you just said this. I mean, this is another part of the controversial thing of this matter, that it might not be a part of the belief system of the parents. And how are they going to handle it then? I mean, then it's going to be really difficult for a child to get this out of his system.
Exactly. And that's why I wrote my book, because I felt it was really important for parents to know that this is a natural phenomenon in young children. It's not dangerous. In fact, it's beneficial for both parent and child. I've had many parents tell me that their experiences with their children were very uplifting, that it gave them spiritual insight, that it was not in conflict with their traditional religious beliefs, but it expanded their traditional beliefs, and that it was a very precious experience for them and was healing for the child.
But do all children recall a past life?
I don't know, but I suspect that many more than we realize are expressing past life memories through their behaviors, through remarks that they make, through physical conditions too, that can be remedied by expressing the past life memory.
So it doesn't take any special child or symptom. It can be any child.
Right. Any child, anywhere, in any part of the world, regardless of the cultural beliefs.
So if this is so natural, as you're saying, why is it kept such a secret outside from belief systems, and it's not in our scientific or in our traditional Christianity beliefs? How should we work with this?
I think we should just be aware that it's something that happens and be open to it in case it comes up in a child. And the biggest impediment to recognizing this is our belief system. It's just a matter of belief. And if we can expand our beliefs, then we can make room for this experience in children. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. And you've met a lot of colleagues in Holland, I heard, that are working in this field. And have you noticed any difference between the situation here in Holland and the situation that you have encountered in the United States?
Big difference. First of all, there's a very it seems like there's a real community here of past life therapists, and there are excellent training programs here. And people are communicating more here because it's a smaller country. And there are actually people who are trained to work with children in Holland. Tineke Noordegraaf, whom I met about 7 years ago in the United States, was the first person I had met, the first therapist who worked with children's past lives. And I was really surprised to find that there are therapists in Europe who have been doing this with children. There are only a handful of therapists who are even aware of this in the United States. So I realized that Holland is far ahead of the rest of the world in this type of therapy and in this type of understanding. And what I'm trying to do through my writing is just inform parents that this is even possible and give them enough information so they can work with their own children. In extreme cases, a therapist might be needed, but not in all cases.
But they're here in Holland. That's one thing you've sort of noticed.
Yes, and it's delightful for me to talk to other people, so many people who are aware of this and who have insights that I don't have. So I'm learning from the Dutch therapists too.
You've seen a lot of Dutch books on the subject, haven't you?
Yes, and it's extremely frustrating to me because I don't read Dutch. And there are these wonderful books about children's spirituality in this country. So it might be that I have to learn the Dutch language so I can learn some more.
Because I heard when you were on the Oprah Winfrey show, you were interviewed by Oprah, that there were drawings shown from Johanna Klinke's book that we had on the show the other day. And they were published by Johanna in her book. And you saw these pictures on the show. And what was your reaction to this?
Well, I asked Oprah's producer, where did you get those drawings? Those are fantastic. Yeah. They were drawings made by children about what happens when we die. Yeah. And the producer said, oh, it's some Dutch book. I tried to find it and I couldn't. And then when I met with Dr. Ian Stevenson in Virginia a few months ago, he showed me Johanna's book. And I said, where did you get that? And he said, well, this is Johanna Klink in the Netherlands. And little did I know I would be sitting in her living room a few months later talking about this with her. So she's a real pioneer in this field. And she's written a lot about children's spirituality and about children's past lives. So it was a real treat for me to meet her. It was kind of an unusual way that I found her through the Oprah Winfrey show.
And your book has been translated in Dutch. And how did that come about?
It was published first in the U.S., and actually it's in, I think, about 6 languages now. So it's getting around the world. And through our website, people have found it and have been communicating with me and telling me their children's stories. And I can email them back, and we can actually do some counseling through the internet, which is unbelievable.
So you're writing a new book now, I've heard. Is that on more cases, or what is it about?
Well, it's more of the same, but it's more specific and focused in that I'm looking at cases of children who reincarnate into the same family. For example, a great-grandfather who comes back as a child, a grandfather who comes back as his own grandchild, or a child who dies in a family and maybe 5 years later reincarnates as another child in that family. And I'm finding that this happens quite often. And people might suspect it, but it's so shocking to them that this could even be that they're not sure what to make of it. So I'm counseling a lot of people in this situation that yes, it's possible that your child can die and come back in another body. And these parents just know it through a sense of familiarity. These children have similar personalities to the other child. They actually have birthmarks or physical characteristics that were like the first child, but not those that could be genetic. Like, for example, if a child died of a certain illness or injury in a past life. I have a case from Malaysia of a 2.5-year-old girl who died in a car accident, and she had 2 specific birthmarks on her body, and when she died she had a big goosebump bruise on her head. And about 6 months ago, the mother had another child who was born with the same identical birthmarks, which could be genetic, yet she had this big goosebump on her head when she was born. And the mother had also had a dream before this child was born in which the first child who died appeared to her saying, "I'm coming back." So this happens a lot. And
case after case.
Yeah.
And you all have sort of written it all out in your new book.
I'm writing it.
You're writing it all out. Okay. Well, I hope we get it in Holland very soon. It will be translated. I hope.
I hope so, because there seems to be a great interest in this topic here, which I'm delighted to see. And I think the Dutch people have a lot to teach me about past life therapy too. So I hope there's that continuing exchange of ideas.
Okay, Theo. Thank you for being on our show, and good luck with your work in the United States.
Thank you, Marianne.
Op dat plein.